Dad yelled. "You're dead weight." So I smiled and walked away. Mom texted. "Don't come back." I replied. "Okay, I just stopped paying your rent, then things got crazy." I never imagined the day would come when my own father would look me in the eye and shout, "You're dead weight." It wasn't the first time he'd been harsh with me, far from it, but that day, something inside me shifted. I was standing there stunned, the weight of his words pressing down like a physical force. I could feel the sting burning behind my eyes, the urge to lash out or crumble into tears. But instead I smiled. A quiet, calm smile that surprised even me. Then I turned and walked away. That smile wasn't about forgiveness or peace. It was defiance. It was the moment I stopped begging for their approval, stopped trying to prove I wasn't a burden. I left the house that day, but what really broke me free was the text from my mother that came a few hours later. "Don't come back." I read those words over and over. No pleading. No explanation. Just cold rejection. So I replied. Simple, direct. "Okay. I just stopped paying your rent." What followed wasn't chaos. It was a reckoning. After I sent that text, "Okay. I just stopped paying your rent," I didn't immediately think about what came next. At first, it felt like a weight lifting, like I'd finally drawn a line in the sand. I didn't reply to their frantic calls or the flood of texts begging for mercy. I let it all sit unanswered, while I quietly started to plan. See, for years, I'd been their invisible bank account. I wasn't just paying rent, I was covering groceries, utilities, repairs they never bothered with themselves. I'd been the fallback, the guy they counted on but never thanked. And that day, when Dad screamed, "Dead weight," it crystallized everything. I wasn't a son anymore. I was just an ATM with a pulse. So I pulled back. First, I stopped the rent payments. The place they lived in, the one I was footing the bill for, suddenly had a ticking clock attached to it. I didn't announce it. I didn't gloat. I just let the silence do the work. Then I dug a little deeper. I accessed some old joint accounts I'd been overlooked on, found the bills they hadn't paid, the loans they'd quietly taken without a word. I learned things I wasn't supposed to know, like that they'd been skimming from my savings to cover debts I never agreed to, that my mom's so-called medical expenses were mostly cosmetic treatments, and that Dad had been hiding a side business I never heard about. I used their own mistakes against them. I didn't confront them directly, not at first. Instead, I started to shift control over everything I'd been paying for. I changed passwords, moved money, even froze some accounts. I was careful, calculated. No emotional outbursts, no scenes. Just quiet, relentless control. The first time I saw the panic in their eyes, it was during a phone call from my mom, her voice shaking as she begged me to just help us get through this month. But this time, I held firm. "I'm done being your safety net," I said. "Figure it out." That silence after I hung up? It was the sound of their carefully constructed world starting to crack. The days after that first firm refusal felt almost surreal. At home, I was calmer than I'd been in years. No more stress from covering their bills or swallowing insults masked as jokes. But on their side, things were unraveling fast. I didn't have to call or send threats. The consequences of my silence were louder than any shouting match. Rent went unpaid. Utilities started to get shut off. Mail piled up, overdue notices, final warnings, all addressed to the people who thought they could treat me like I didn't matter. At first, I thought maybe they'd come around. Maybe Mom would send a text begging for forgiveness, or Dad would at least try to explain. But no. They doubled down on blame. They told family friends I'd gone off the rails, that I was selfish, ungrateful. Even some of my siblings took their side at first. "He should help, he's family," they said. I wasn't worried about what others thought anymore. What mattered was that for once, I had the upper hand. One afternoon, I got an unexpected call from my landlord. He was calm but firm. "Your parents are behind on rent. We might have to start eviction proceedings." I didn't have to ask who had been paying all these months. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. I'm no longer covering their rent, I said. If they want to stay, they'll have to sort it out. That call marked the first real crack in the facade. After years of pretending they were fine, they were suddenly facing consequences. And it was all because I stopped being their invisible wallet. But the chaos didn't stop there. One evening, I got a text from a neighbor who noticed strange activity: lights going off, people coming and going at odd hours. I suspected they were scrambling, maybe selling belongings to cover costs. I even caught wind of some calls my parents made, to distant relatives, old friends, asking for loans, favors, anything. It was like watching a house of cards collapse, and I was standing just far enough away to see it all clearly. But I didn't feel like a villain. For the first time, I felt free. It all came to a head one night when my dad showed up at my apartment unannounced. I wasn't expecting him, and honestly, I wasn't eager to see him. But there he was, standing in the doorway, eyes tired but burning with anger. "You need to fix this," he said, voice low but urgent. "You're tearing this family apart." I looked at him, really looked, and saw something I hadn't seen before, a flicker of desperation behind the rage. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control, about power. "I stopped paying for your rent," I said calmly. "I'm done being your crutch." He scoffed. "You think this is about rent? It's about respect. About loyalty." I shook my head. "Respect is earned. Loyalty isn't just a word to throw around when you need something." The argument grew heated, voices rising. He threw every guilt trip, every insult he'd ever used, but I stood my ground. I wasn't going to back down. After he left, I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about money or bills. It was about breaking free from years of emotional chains, years of feeling worthless in my own home. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't just cutting off payments. I was going to take control of the whole situation. I started gathering documents, leases, bank statements, phone records, anything that showed what was really going on. I talked to professionals, lawyers, financial advisors. I learned how to protect myself while exposing the truth. I wasn't out for revenge to ruin them. I wanted justice. I wanted to reclaim my dignity and finally be seen as more than dead weight. After that confrontation with Dad, something inside me hardened. I realized I couldn't keep drifting in this toxic cycle, giving, forgiving, and getting trampled over. It was time to stop surviving and start fighting for myself. Not with fists or anger, but with cold, calculated moves. I spent days digging through every document I could get my hands on. Bank statements, utility bills, even old emails and texts. I found out how much money I'd quietly poured into the house over the years, how they'd been spending behind my back, the debts they'd racked up without telling me. One night, I sat down with a financial advisor I'd found online, someone who didn't know me personally and had no reason to sugarcoat anything. She helped me understand the power I had. The money I'd been sending wasn't just charity. It was a tool I could use. I set up new accounts in my name only. I stopped automatic payments for everything tied to their names. I changed passwords on shared utilities. Slowly but surely, I pulled the plug on the financial lifeline they'd come to depend on. The fallout was immediate. My phone exploded with calls, Mom's voice cracking as she begged me to reconsider, Dad's angry threats, even messages from siblings caught in the crossfire. But I stayed silent. Every call was a reminder of the chains I was breaking. Every text was proof I was finally standing up for myself. Then came the unexpected. I discovered some things they had hidden: loans taken out in my name, bills unpaid to companies I'd never heard of, credit cards maxed out with my information. That was the last straw. I confronted them quietly, showing them the papers and the evidence. Their faces went pale. For the first time, they were the ones speechless. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about respect. About accountability. I watched their carefully built walls start to crumble. And for the first time in years, I felt powerful. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I was reclaiming my life. Taking control felt like stepping into a new world, one where I wasn't just the forgotten son or the dead weight. But power came with its own price. I soon learned that pulling the rug out from under people you love, well, people who used to call themselves family, doesn't just cause cracks. It ignites a full-blown earthquake. After I cut off payments and confronted them about the fraudulent debts, the house started feeling less like home and more like a battleground. They scrambled, but this time, instead of turning to me, they turned on each other. Mom and Dad argued bitterly in whispers I could hear through the walls. Siblings picked sides, some calling me cold and selfish, others quietly rooting for me but too afraid to say it. The night the eviction notice arrived at their doorstep, it was the moment I knew things had really changed. They didn't call me then. Maybe they were ashamed or maybe they were just too proud to ask. But my mom's texts started flooding my phone. The tone was shifting, no longer anger or blame, but panic. Please, this isn't how I wanted it to go. We're family. You have to help us. I'm scared, please. I sat with those messages for hours. The lines between justice and cruelty blurred in my mind. Did I go too far? Was this really what I wanted? But then I remembered every silent dinner, every sneer disguised as a joke, every night I wondered if I'd ever be enough. Still, the damage was real. My mother's health declined rapidly from stress, and my dad became a shell of the man I once knew, angry, bitter, and broken. It was like watching ghosts haunt the home I'd paid for but no longer felt safe in. And the fallout didn't stop at my parents. My siblings became casualties in this war, their relationships with me fractured beyond repair. Some stopped answering my calls entirely. Others sent angry texts accusing me of betrayal. Family gatherings turned into icy standoffs or silent disappearances. One evening, my sister, who had always been the golden child, showed up at my door, eyes red from crying. She accused me of destroying the family. I wanted to scream, to tell her how it felt to be invisible for so long, but all I could do was shut the door and leave her standing there. I realized then that revenge wasn't just about getting even. It was about breaking chains that bound me to pain and silence. But freedom came with a cost. The family I thought I had was gone. I sat in my apartment one night, surrounded by the quiet I'd fought for, and I wondered if healing was possible after the dust settled. Could we ever rebuild trust, or was this the new normal? What I learned was this: standing up for yourself isn't easy. It's messy, painful, and lonely. But sometimes it's necessary. If I could give advice to anyone stuck in that place, the place of being treated like your dead weight, it would be this: you are not a burden. Your worth isn't measured by what others think or say. And sometimes, walking away with a smile isn't defeat. It's the first step toward taking your life back. The chaos I unleashed wasn't something I had planned in detail. I just wanted out, wanted to be seen, wanted to be respected. But once I'd pulled the trigger, the fallout swept through every corner of my life like a storm with no mercy. I didn't realize how deeply intertwined we all were, or how fragile those ties could be. Weeks turned into months. The eviction notice forced my parents to move out, scrambling to find a place they could afford on their own. The family fractured, the siblings drifting apart, their old bonds frayed beyond easy repair. Every phone call, every message, was laced with resentment or guilt, or sometimes silence. The house felt empty without them, a monument to the price of my standing up. But in that silence, I found something I'd never known: peace. I wasn't constantly walking on eggshells, waiting for the next insult or demand. I wasn't living in the shadows of expectations I could never meet. The weight of being, dead weight, lifted. For once, I felt solid, rooted in my own worth, not just their approval. Then came the surprises. People I hadn't expected reached out. Old friends, cousins, even distant relatives who knew the truth beneath the family drama. They sent messages of support, offers to help, reminders that I wasn't alone. It was a new kind of family. One built not on blood, but on respect and understanding. My Uncle Rick, who had stood quietly by during the chaos, became my anchor. His steady presence reminded me that family isn't always who you're born to. Sometimes it's who shows up when the dust settles. But healing wasn't simple. One night, I sat with an old photo album, staring at pictures of happier times. I wondered if forgiveness was possible, not just for them, but for me. Could I let go of the bitterness without losing myself? Could I rebuild bridges without burning down the parts of me that had been ignored for so long? I realized that revenge, while satisfying in the moment, was only a chapter in a longer story. The real challenge was what came next, rebuilding a life on my own terms, with boundaries and self-respect. I learned that standing up doesn't mean you have to destroy everything you love. Sometimes, it means protecting yourself enough to be there for the people who deserve you. To anyone listening, caught in the crossfire of family pain, it's okay to walk away. It's okay to say no. And it's okay to fight for your worth, even if that fight changes everything. Because at the end of the day, your story isn't defined by what they say about you, but by how you choose to rise. Just when I thought I had braced myself for the worst, life threw in a few surprises, ones that made me question everything I thought I knew about my family, and even myself. After months of silence, my mother sent me a letter. No texts, no calls, just a single envelope in the mail, with my name scrawled in shaky handwriting. I debated whether to open it for days, the old anxiety creeping in. Would it be more blame? Another guilt trip? Or maybe a plea for reconciliation? When I finally tore it open, I found something I hadn't expected, a raw, honest apology. Not the polished, defensive words I'd come to expect, but something real. She admitted how wrong she'd been, how blind she'd been to my struggles and pain. She wrote about the pressure she'd felt from my stepfather, about the regrets that kept her awake at night. Reading those words, I felt something crack open inside me, part relief, part grief. It wasn't an instant fix. It wasn't a sudden forgiveness. But it was a start. Around the same time, my father's health took a turn for the worse. The man who had yelled, "Dead weight," was now weak and vulnerable, battling an illness that no amount of anger or pride could mask. Despite everything, I found myself visiting him in the hospital. It wasn't easy. Old wounds bled fresh. The weight of years of pain pressed down hard. But I went. We didn't talk much, mostly silence, punctuated by weak attempts at conversation. But just being there, sharing that fragile space, felt like a small step towards something neither of us fully understood yet. Meanwhile, the financial chaos I'd triggered rippled through other parts of my life. Creditors called, and some old debts I didn't even know about resurfaced, threatening my own stability. The fight for justice was complicated. Winning one battle often meant fighting two more. I learned the hard way that standing up to toxic family dynamics doesn't come with a neat bow on top. It's messy and complicated, full of victories and setbacks. Sometimes you win the fight but lose a part of yourself. But through all of it, I found my voice. I started to rebuild, not just financially, but emotionally. I went to therapy, talked to friends, and began setting boundaries that finally felt like mine. The man who once smiled and walked away in silence was still there, but stronger, wiser, and finally, ready to live for himself. The aftermath of my decision to stop paying their rent and take control of my life didn't just affect my parents. It rippled through every relationship I had, and the echoes lingered far longer than I expected. Friends who once called every week started drifting away, uncomfortable with the tension that hung over me like a shadow. Some family members took sides, others disappeared completely, and the siblings I grew up with became strangers in the same room. At family gatherings, when they happened, there was an icy silence or forced smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The golden memories we once shared felt like a fragile myth, something we talked about in whispers rather than living in together. And yet, amid the fractures, I found new connections. People who understood what it meant to be the forgotten one, or the burden, finally reached out. Support came from unexpected places, old coworkers, distant cousins, even neighbors. They listened without judgment, offered kindness without strings. I started rebuilding my life piece by piece. My apartment, small and plain, became a sanctuary. I decorated it with things that made me smile, photos of friends, books I loved, plants that thrived under my care. It was a home that belonged to me, not to their expectations. The money I saved by cutting ties with their endless demands finally let me breathe. I started setting goals again, small ones at first. Paying off debts I'd hidden from myself. Signing up for classes I'd always wanted to take. Planning trips that were just for me. I still wrestled with guilt. The knowledge that my actions had hurt the people I once called family was a heavy burden. But I reminded myself that being kind to yourself sometimes means making hard choices. One evening, alone in my apartment, I realized how far I'd come. The quiet no longer felt empty, it felt like possibility. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was beginning to live. If there was one thing I wished I'd known earlier, it was this: sometimes the hardest step isn't walking away, but learning to stand firm when you come back to yourself. Looking back now, it's clear that walking away the day my dad yelled, "You're dead weight," wasn't the end, it was the beginning. That moment cracked open a door I didn't know I needed to walk through, even if the path ahead was rocky and uncertain. Reclaiming my worth wasn't about revenge, spite, or punishment. It was about setting boundaries that had never existed before. About learning to see myself not as a burden, but as a person who deserved respect, kindness, and a voice. Family taught me a lot, not just about pain, but about resilience. I saw how easily love can turn to neglect, how silence can become a weapon, and how long it takes to heal wounds inflicted over a lifetime. But I also learned that healing is possible. Not because others change, but because you decide to change your own story. The house they lost, the money withheld, the broken relationships, they were all chapters in this story, but they don't have to be the whole story. I started writing new chapters filled with quiet victories, building friendships that nourish me, setting goals that excite me, and finding peace in my own company. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to take away from this, it's this: your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. You don't have to carry their expectations, their insults, or their neglect. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is smile, turn your back, and walk away. Not to run from pain, but to step toward your own freedom. And when the dust settles, you might just find that the life waiting on the other side is more than you ever imagined.